My name is Lucy Richmond. I'm a fourth year in the college studying law, letters, and society. I'm also the co-chair of the Student Advisory Board this year. And I am so excited to be here introducing Cody Keenan today for a discussion about Biden's address to the joint sessions of Congress tonight, which is, I believe, 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central, if you want to mark your calendars, as well as just a more general conversation about presidential speechwriting. Cody Keenan got his BA at Northwestern, where he currently teaches, and his M.P.P. at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. He started working with President Obama in 2007, and he became the White House Director of Speechwriting in 2013. He is currently also a partner and a political advisor at Fenway Strategies, and his memoir, Grace, will be coming out in 2022. And we're so excited to hear from him today, especially, but always, I'm really excited for this conversation. And just to give quick advice or how this is going to work, Cody, please feel free to take this in any direction you want. You're the expert here. I'm going to kick us off with a couple of questions, and then we're going to open it up to our general audience. If you guys want to drop questions in the chat while we're talking, please feel free. Otherwise, when we open it up, you guys can raise your hands and I'll call on you. So I'm going to kick it off with kind of a general question. Cody, I believe you said that great speeches make arguments. So I wanted to ask, what argument or arguments is Biden going to need to make tonight? And just in general, what does Biden need to do with this speech tonight?
Sure. They've telegraphed the argument they're going to make. I'll get to that. I think there's not a lot he needs to do because he's actually in a pretty solid position for a president going into their first State of the Union address, and so think of it through that lens, right? I mean, this is a guy who's sat through almost 50 of them in the chamber, so he knows kind of how they work, and he sat behind the president for 8 of them, so now it's his first big moment in the podium to be presidential, and that's really what the State of the Union address is. We can talk later about if it still matters, how important it is compared to previous generations, but it's any president's biggest audience of the year, so it matters to the White House to take full advantage of that. He'll probably have somewhere in the mid 30 million people watching if recent trends hold. And remember, most of the people who are watching, by the way, I should say, I have a 5-month-old daughter, and there are guys doing construction work right outside my windows. So you're either going to hear her screaming or people yelling in Spanish, and it could be either one of them. And there's a hospital down the street, so you're going to hear ambulances. It's New York. So you don't want to let a moment like that go to waste with an audience that big. He was smart to wait 100 days to deliver the first, because it actually gave them a chance to really put a bunch of notches in their belt. I mean, they hit 200 million doses like they said they would by the 100th day. He already passed a rescue package that's having a sizable impact on the economy. More jobs been created than any other president's first 100 days. So he begins the speech with a lot of wind at his back, and I would expect to hear him trumpet some of those statistics, probably not for too long. And then the argument they're going to make is for the American Family Plan, which is basically, or American Families Plan, which is basically where do we go from here, right? Like, the economy will not be the same when we come out of COVID. How do we make sure it's actually better, fairer, more equitable? And, kind of the main planks, as I understand them, are universal pre-K and child tax credits, just ways for families to function better. As new parents, we can tell you how important childcare is. So to be able to do that, to put money in parents' pockets every single year on a permanent basis, I think it boosts the Pell Grant. It helps make HBCUs more affordable, 2 years of free community college. So it's really actually a reversal from the only pretty much the only significant piece of legislation in the Trump years, which was a massive tax cut for the top. This is basically something that helps everybody else. And that's, what he ran on. I think that's what I'll outline here. But remember, it's a State of the Union address. So I don't want to dissuade anybody from watching, but my guess is that it'll be a pretty standard State of the Union address. We always we sit down. I did this every year with President Obama. We would sit down and be like, all right, this is the year we make it different. This is the year we make it short, or focus on only one idea, or like, one year we actually talked about doing it on the road somewhere, and all the networks said, well, then we're not going to show it because we want the pageantry and the pomp and the circumstance. So without the audience at home, we decided not to do that. So inertia kind of grabs you and takes over as you're working on this speech. It's a chance for like every cabinet agency wants their ideas in there. And there's a lot of important things that you want to do when you're in power. So, I think knowing the Biden speechwriting team, it's not going to be a super bloated laundry list, but you still have a lot of business to get done. The rest of the world is kind of warily looking at America to see if we're a trustworthy ally again. So I would suspect there's going to be a foreign policy section. He's probably going to talk about race and policing and guns. And so that's what always makes these speeches a beast for the speechwriter to put together, is that there's just so much ground to cover, and you want to do it in a way that's not just whacking people over the head with 50 different items for an hour. And then finally, I think, what makes this one really interesting and worth watching is that there's only going to be 200 people in the chamber because of COVID. Whereas you normally have, I think, about 1,200, including the galleries. So you'll see less of the, one side of the chamber getting up and applauding for every single line in the speech. I hope. We never liked that. I understand the utility of it and the pageantry of it, but that's what makes these speeches take longer than an hour most of the time. So that'll be interesting to watch. But all in all, I'm pretty excited for his big moment, and I plan on watching.
Awesome. Thank you. And just quickly bouncing off of that, you kind of touched on this. What constitutes a successful State of the Union, or in this case, a successful address to joint sessions?
Yeah. I mean, this is what I was touching on when I said, do these speeches really matter anymore? They matter in the size of the audience you get. And most of the people tuning in are not people who watch cable news all day long or who are on Twitter all day long. I mean, remember, those of us who are into politics or into these things, the vast majority of the country is not. So for a lot of people who, work all day, take care of their kids all day, this is a chance to tune in and see what President Biden has to say. And these are people who might not consume news on a regular basis. So it's really important in that sense. And it succeeds if it makes sense to people at home. I mean, you don't really see big bumps anymore in polling after a speech like this because the country is so polarized. There's just not a lot of movement. So I wouldn't expect that you'll see one. I remember, I think in our first State of the Union address or second, you always get these massive snap polls where it's like 92% of the people liked what they saw. Great, that's awesome. It doesn't necessarily translate into anything. Within a week, the approval rating would be about the same. You'll probably see that again tonight because most of his policies are really, really popular. If you separate them all, do you think we should have universal pre-K? Do you want a permanent child care tax credit in your pockets? Do you want child care or college to be cheaper? Do you want healthcare to be cheaper? Those all poll really well. Do you want to raise taxes on the wealthy to pay for this stuff? That polls really well. So when it comes to polling, it's entirely dependent on how the question is asked. But the speech itself doesn't necessarily do anything. I mean, we had a really big moment. One of the ones I'm most proud of, the end of the 2013 State of the Union address, the gallery was full of survivors of gun violence or the families of people who died in gun violence. And the entire ending of the speech was kind of this rallying cry about how they all deserve a vote. And, I remember pundits afterwards being like, how do Republicans vote against gun safety laws after something like that? Well, we knew they were probably going to, and they did. So the speech doesn't necessarily shift, the balance of power or the votes that legislation needs to pass. But what it can do is convey his ideas and his plans to, people who aren't necessarily heavy news consumers in a clear and concise way.
Thank you. And yeah, I think there are a lot of politics fans on the call, probably a lot of people who watch The West Wing and want to be Sam Seaborn. So to that point, I think a lot of us have imagined the moment of sitting down and writing a State of the Union or a presidential address. As someone that has lived that moment, I don't know, gotten pen or paper or your laptop out, what is going through your head? What's the process? How do you start? And how do you follow it through, I guess? How do you get to a final product?
Well, I can promise you it's a speech that every speechwriter or aspiring speechwriter dreams of being able to write. And then once you've done it, you never want to do it again. It's the worst. It's just the worst speech for a speechwriter to write. It's probably the most prestigious, but it's so hard to put together. It's the only speech where we probably start about a month out, maybe 2 months out. Not necessarily sketching, but having, we call them blue sky meetings where I might sit down with the president and David Axelrod or Dan Pfeiffer or Jen Palmieri or our senior advisors. And the president would call it blue sky because he'd say, all right, just assume, we're kind of cruising at 40,000 feet. We don't have political realities to deal with. We don't have a Congress to deal with. What would we do? And you kind of sketch out your ideal sort of utopia. We'd have somebody running point on the policy process, mostly to protect the speechwriters from policy people. And they would go kind of tell every cabinet agency, shake the trees, give us your best and biggest ideas, and we'll see if the president likes them and wants to put them in the speech. And we'd come back a few weeks later, sit with the president. We'd say, okay, now we're down at 10,000 feet, right? Congress exists. What are we going to do? And we'd start going through that list of ideas. David Axelrod would, pull those ideas. We wouldn't choose like the 10 or 20 best, but we would test different ways of describing them to see which works best. But we would test every idea to see how they were. That didn't necessarily influence how we'd pick them. One of my favorites was, I think it was 2014 or 2015. Treasury Secretary Jack Lew was hot to trot on, funny you mentioned the West Wing, this was out of a West Wing episode, on getting rid of the penny because it actually like costs more money to make than it is whatever. So that made its way into the test. He wanted it in the State of the Union address. I was like, look, there are so many more important things to talk about than getting rid of the penny. If you want to get rid of the penny, just get rid of the penny. It came at dead last, like 7% of Americans favor getting rid of the penny. So just having that in the poll was a good way to say we're not doing this. And then I finally probably start drafting something once you've got, more or less the policy ideas that you're going to include in the speech. About 2 weeks out, maybe 3, it would ruin Christmas every year. My Christmas, nobody else's. And I'd usually give the president a draft about, I'd give Axe and other senior advisors a draft maybe 10 days out for them to look at. And then I'd give the president a draft about a week out. And the next 7 days are awful. It's like riding in a car with no brakes, no windows or doors at 200 miles an hour. You're just trying to keep your copy of the draft intact while everyone tries to get their thing in there. And while, the fact checkers, including my wife, are tearing it apart. And then you don't really get to rest until the president goes up to deliver the speech. And that's kind of when I finally kick back. But then, you have more speeches starting the next day to go out and sell it.
Wow, sounds very intense, but incredible. Also, an incredible work done. I'm going to ask one more question, then Monica, I'm going to throw it over to you and open it up to everyone. So if you're thinking of questions, dropping them in the chat, anything that you want. My last question is, a lot of people, especially on the campaign trail, were saying that President Biden isn't a good speaker. He should try to avoid speaking as much as possible, and then maybe had a change of heart or more encouraged as he became president. I wanted to ask your thoughts on that. And then also more broadly, what do you do if you're writing for someone that may not have the strongest speaking voice or be the strongest speaker? How do you make things work for them? And how do you give them, I guess, a tone that, distinguishes them and works for them?
Yeah, I disagree with the notion that he's not a good speaker. He's just a different kind of speaker. I think he talks like most normal people do. And by normal, I mean people who aren't 50-year politicians. I mean, he's probably the least varnished person who's been a politician for 50 years that there is. Everyone always points out Joe Biden's gaffes. Gaffe is just another word for accidentally telling the truth. So as a speechwriter, you want to write for that. You have to write for that person, but you don't want to make them sound different than they really are. I mean, I get, now that I no longer work for President Obama, I get people asking me all the time, can you make me sound like President Obama? Or can you make me sound authentic? And I'm like, I mean, no, I can't make you sound like President Obama. I can make you sound like yourself, maybe just a little bit better. But authenticity is like just something you have or you don't. And Joe Biden's got it. I don't think anyone's ever going to accuse him of being inauthentic. So as a speechwriter, I would, for him, keep the speech pretty plain, just like the way he speaks. I'd throw in some stories that might move him on a personal human level because that's where he thrives. I don't think you have to make a big argument that doesn't sound like you. Where if you want an example of a State of the Union address that was inauthentic, if you watched any of President Trump's, you can just tell that it's the first time he's reading this on the teleprompter. He always had this, he seemed caged. He hated working off teleprompters. And it didn't work for him. And he had this tick too, where he would you could tell he was reading something for the first time because he'd ad-lib it after that. He's like, many people don't know that, you know? And it's like, no, yeah, we all know that. This is something everybody knows except for you. So I would assume Joe Biden too, like President Obama, is going to practice it a few times today. He might actually be doing it right this second, just to, you know, go through it. I'm sure he's looked at a bunch of drafts, sent them back to Vinay, his speechwriter, and he'll practice a couple times, have a good dinner, and go to the State of the Union.
Thank you. Monica, we lost your hand, but do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I took it down when you said you would call on me. Hi, I'm Monica. I'm in the divinity school. I did my undergrad at Northwestern, so go Cats.
Go Cats.
You mentioned that there are about a dozen topics that you think are just guaranteed to come up and that the administration has been forecasting will come up. Do you have any suggestions for joint address bingo of things that might come up but are not guaranteed?
Oh, that's interesting. Might come up that aren't guaranteed. God, that could be literally anything. I think each significant plank of the American Families Plan will come up. I would think guns would come up, immigration. I mean, these are all things they've telegraphed. But you're looking for a wild card.
Yeah.
God, I'd have to. That's a really good. I mean, it could be anything. I think about, you know, most State of the Union addresses aren't memorable. The things that are memorable are kind of either the moments of high drama or the ones where you're like, where did that come from? And I remember one year Bush took on steroids in baseball in his State of the Union address. And I was like, now that's a good bingo box. Nobody would have guessed that. What would it be for Biden? God, I don't know. You know, he's been good at not taking the bait on any of these kind of BS culture war issues. So I wouldn't expect to see anything like that. He's not gonna talk about how he's like gonna, you know, give us only one burger a year or whatever the dumb thing was. Let me ponder that. And if I
it's okay if my question is just too good. That's fair.
It is really, really good.
That was good. And Monica, if you want to drop the link to that bingo, I think we would all definitely enjoy playing it tonight. Okay, I'm going to ask one more about the relationship between actually, you know what? I'm going to throw it to Colby. Go ahead.
Are you sure?
Yes, I'm sure.
All right. I like having met a lot of speechwriters, the IOP. A lot of them spend time talking about speeches that they wrote that worked, but I'm always curious about the speeches that you wrote that didn't work. Like, what was the speech that you wrote that totally failed, and what didn't you calculate for ahead of time?
I do have an answer for this, but first I'll say it's hard to write a speech that totally fails, not because we're amazing, but because so many people will look at it before it even goes to the president, from ACTS and other senior advisors to the fact checkers to the lawyers. So for a speech to get all the way through and fall flat would be like a failure on the part of about 70 people. So that rarely happens. One that really pissed me off in a big way and made me really cynical about Washington was, it was actually at Northwestern, at the business school in 2014. And it was kind of, he wanted to give a big economic speech. The president always wanted to give these hour-long economic speeches because it made him feel better. He was like, he always believed that he could convince the American people of anything if he just spoke enough about it, you know, rationally, logically. And it comes from a good place. And he just had faith in the American people to absorb a big argument, logic and reason. Now, the way the media environment, everything works today, like a Tuesday afternoon speech at a business school, just doesn't get a ton of pickup. But he basically wanted to lay out all of the planks of the Democrats' economic plan because they weren't doing a great job at the polls of doing that on their own before the midterms. And again, this was something where like every single thing he talked about polls really, really well. And then we had a line at the end of the speech that made it through the whole process, but it was my line. That was just like, I'm not on the ballot this year, but make no mistake, these policies are on the ballot. And the point of it was, you know, if you want, you know, bigger Pell Grants or a little student loan relief or child care tax credit, clean energy jobs, whatever, you have to go vote for this stuff, even if Barack Obama's not on the ballot. Mitch McConnell had turned that into an attack ad, like by the very end of the day, saying that like Barack Obama's agenda is on the ballot. And it really bugged me because it was just one of those kind of cynical things that you hate about Washington, where any reporter with a brain knows exactly what Barack Obama was saying. But, you know, the tip sheets the next morning are like, did he make a gaffe? Like, and it's just, that was a failure on my part for including that in there and for expecting better out of the Washington press corps. But yeah, that's one that stings, and that fell flat.
Thank you. All right, I'm gonna ask
One
one more
line
question.
out of an hour-long speech, and it still burns me.
I'm gonna ask one more question, and then I believe David's on, so I'm gonna throw it over to him. I just was really curious about the relationship between policy and messaging, because I've always been told policy is messaging, and then conversely, speeches are supposed to serve as springboards for policy. So I was just curious how you do that, how you think through that, and I imagine that involves a lot of interdepartmental work. So how you work through that?
I thought you were going to say interdepartmental warfare, because it does. Well, a good speech tells a story. And so what you said can be true, is that, good policy is good messaging, but a lot of the time the geniuses who come up with policy just can't message worth a damn. And, turn it around. I can't come up with good policy worth a damn either, despite my master's in public policy. So it's the speechwriter's job to take this policy and make it accessible and memorable. Ideally, if you can get somebody who has watched the president give a speech on something, go home and tell 5 other people what they saw, be able to talk about it, rather than have, a husband ask, what did the president talk about? And you're like, I have no idea. That's a failure. But so it's a speechwriter's job to take that good policy and make it sticky and memorable. Certainly for a speech like the State of the Union address. I mean, one of the jobs of a speechwriter is basically to boil down really complicated policy into one sentence that sticks with people, because that's pretty much all the real estate you're going to get. So, but we would have a lot of not necessarily fights, but skirmishes between speechwriters and policy people, because nobody wants to cede their turf to anyone else. But and then at the end of the day, we'd all shake hands and make up, because, policy people want to protect their genius policy. We want to make sure it sounds good. And there's kind of an inherent clash in there. What makes, for all you who want to go into politics, what makes a staffer really, really valuable is somebody who can do both. Somebody who is genius at policy and genius at messaging. And they were always the people that I went to first. People like Brian Deese, Jacob Liebenluft, who are both back in the Biden administration now. They could do both. So I would just go to them and be like, listen, I was talking to this wonk on your team on the National Economic Council. I don't understand a word coming out of his mouth. What does that mean? They can bust it down into a sentence. And that just makes you so valuable to anybody you ever want to work for.
Thank you. That's very helpful advice. David, if you're on the call, I'm going to pass it over to you.
There I am. Can you guys see me?
Hey, man.
I'm trying to disguise the fact that I'm in your town, walking through a Central Park here. So I've been listening to this session as I was taking in the sights and sounds of New York City, here for the coverage tonight. First of all, how you doing?
Good. Can't complain.
I was wondering, I kept myself off the screen because I didn't want to remind you about all the times I pissed you off by adding complications to your life as you put these speeches together. I think I
saw you. That's why I kept dropping your name.
The appropriate thing for the appropriate title for this whole exercise is "Rent This Space." I think, because every agency of government, the battles were prodigious for real estate in the State of the Union speech. But here's what here's my observation. I want to ask you about it. It's almost May, and this is Biden's first speech to Congress, and that is intentional. And I think it was kind of brilliant, actually, because he's waited until he actually has progress to report on before he spoke. But I can't remember the president speaking to Congress this late in the year ever. Can you?
No. And we did in 2009, but that was the healthcare speech in September. That wasn't this kind of State of the Union address. But I'm glad you said that. I made the same point in my first answer before you joined, which is that it was really smart. I mean, we went, I think it was like February 24th, our first year, but we went because the House was still on fire. The economy was still falling apart. And the president felt the need to go out, not only reassure people that a grown-up was in charge, but here's what we're going to do now. We had just signed the Recovery Act the week prior. But we didn't have any successes to point to yet, because the House was still on fire. What we could tell people is that we just spent another $1 trillion on top of the $1 trillion that, President Bush had spent in the fall. So people are seeing $2 trillion out the door before anything's really happening. Whereas you're right, now Biden can all of a sudden say, look, we've just created the most jobs of any president's first 100 days. We got 200 million doses of people's arms. people's arms. All you have to do, acts right now, you can look around. People aren't wearing masks in New York for the first time that I can remember, because a third of the city is vaccinated. I mean, people, it's one thing for a president to say, look at all I've done, but it's more important for people to go outside. I don't necessarily mean literally, but see what's happening in their neighborhoods, right? For us during the recession, it was, did your neighbor finally get a new car? Are more businesses coming back and opening up? Now it's kind of the same. Are more businesses coming back? Are people walking around without masks, or restaurants opening? People can see those things, and then, Biden could take that victory lap and then kind of lay out step two.
Yeah, and it makes it easier if people feel like that the previous 2 trillion actually went to tangible things that they can feel that have produced results. The other thing that strikes me as smart was to stage the different stages of their fiscal plan. They're building a rocket here, and they're building it in stages. The first stage was the Rescue Act, which was kind of easy because you didn't have to pay, nobody thought it had to be paid for. The emergency was obvious. The next one is this infrastructure plan, a little tougher because they do feel like they have to pay for it, but there is a bipartisan sense that there is a need for infrastructure. The last one I think is the toughest, even though some of the items, as you point out, many of them are very popular, but more likely to stir deep partisan divides. So the word socialism will come into play here, and sure. So they've been, I think, clever about the staging, because if they had mushed it all together, the rocket would never have left the ground.
Yeah, and like you said, Republicans get behind the infrastructure thing because they can go back to their districts and cut the ribbon and say, I brought home this bridge, or if I wish Joe Manchin would take a page out of Robert Byrd's textbook. Half of everything in West Virginia is named after Robert Byrd. Just name it the Manchin Bridge and vote for it, man. The third part, you're right, is tougher, because these are policies that will make a demonstrable impact in people's lives, but you can't be there for the ribbon cutting. And they've said they'll pay for it through raising taxes on the wealthy, which, as the White House pointed out the other day, polls really well, even among Republicans. You're not going to get a single Republican vote for it, but you're right, that's going to be the high wire act.
Yeah, well, and I think that he's been very artful in his body language. It's not been confrontational. He hasn't vilified his opponents. He's always left open the possibility of cooperation. I think that the opposition to this will want to add up the 3 tranches of his fiscal plan and talk about $5 trillion in spending. They will talk about higher taxes. I think that his strategy has to be to focus not on the overall sticker, but on the individual components of the bill, and to make clear to everyone listening, you're almost certainly not going to be paying for these projects, because it's only the top 0.5% of Americans who are going to be exposed to these taxes, the people who have done the best. So it'll be a battle of definition between, and that's the value. You said, what are the value of these speeches? Just gets to lay it out in his terms. Yep. He gets to lay out the terms of the debate. So anyway, it's good to see you. Great of you to do this.
Yeah, man. Happy to. Good luck today.
Thank you. I'm turning it back to you guys.
Okay. Thank you. Ali, if you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, thanks so much for doing this. So I wanted to ask about Soundbites. So you say that like a good speech tells a story that's one coherent piece of rhetoric, but then again, you have cable news showing Soundbites. There'll be a 15-minute section. David Axelrod says something. Rick Santorum will say why helping families makes him mad, all of that. How do you kind of navigate that, crafting one speech versus, 20 or 30 different parts that get turned into ads or sound bites on cable news?
Yeah, my answer is you don't. I think people there are plenty of speechwriters and comms professionals who disagree with that, but the President Obama thought that way too. I can't tell you how many times Ben Rhodes and I thought we had some killer line in a speech, and that would be the one thing that came back crossed out because he knew what we were doing. It's, you don't build a speech around a line. You build a speech around a story, make sure it tells a coherent one, and then stick in a line or two towards the end if you think it fits. But you can't really write for sound bites either. You can, well, yes, you can. You know what'll get picked up. And you can try to craft a good line here or there that'll get picked up as long as it stays true to the overall message. Some people are really good at that. David Plouffe was great at that. He would take, he took over for Axe as one of the senior advisors when Axe left. And whereas Axe would go through and kind of edit the whole speech, Plouffe and Dan Pfeiffer later on would basically just insert, one line that they knew would be the line that got picked up, and not a line that you find carved into a monument someday, but one that, the pundits will run with, and they were usually right. So I always found that helpful because that's not the type of thing I was thinking about. As a speechwriter, you're just trying to make sure the speech intellectually holds together, that each line flows into the next. You're not thinking about where to cram in a quick sound bite. But if you've left yourself enough time by the end of the speech, I can't remember which one it was. I think it was 2014 was like our wittiest, pithiest State of the Union address, because I actually threw some of those lines in there only because I finished so early. The president liked it earlier than usual that I had some extra time to play with it. So that's why, when your professors tell you to sleep on a paper before handing it in, give yourself some extra time. That's what that extra time is for. It gives you the chance to, polish and edit and revise. And I can't remember who said it, but 90% of all your time on a piece of writing should be revising it. Which doesn't always work out in the real world, but it's totally true.
Cool. Thank you so much. So we are right at time. Thank you so much, Cody. This was incredibly cool. I think we're all even more excited for this speech tonight, and it kind of feels like we got a slice of the Obama White House, like what it was like sitting in a room with you all. So thank you. This is really cool. And
Thanks
just a
so much
brief reminder. Yeah, of course. And brief reminder, the speech is at 9 Eastern, 8 Central tonight if you want to tune in. Yeah, thank you guys so much for joining us. Have a great Wednesday.
Take care.
Bye.